The sky screamed before the rain began. Dark clouds twisted low over the dead moon, glowing faint green as the first drops fell. Each drop hissed when it touched metal, biting into old ships and broken towers. The rain burned everything it touched. No warning sirens sounded anymore. No one lived here long enough to care. Near a collapsed transport pod, something small moved. The hatchling had crawled from the wreck hours ago. Her scales were pale, almost white, unlike the strong dark colors of her kind. That was why she had been left behind. Weak. Unwanted. Her tiny claws slipped on the wet ground as acid rain splashed across her back. She tried to hide beneath a bent panel, but the metal was already thinning. She made a sound that barely rose above the rain. A soft, broken sob. Her eyes, large and silver, searched the empty scrapyard. No elders came. No warriors returned. Only the rain answered her cries, burning deeper with every passing moment. Far across the yard, inside a rusted maintenance hangar, a human named Calder Rook paused mid-step. His scanner flickered. Then died. Calder frowned. That should not happen. The storm interference was strong, but not enough to kill a hardened tool. He tapped the screen, then listened. At first, he heard only rain striking metal like 1,000 angry fingers. Then he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. Calder stood still. He removed his helmet seal just enough to be sure he was not imagining things. The sound came again. Thin. Weak. Alive. No one's supposed to be out there, he muttered. The moon was listed as empty. Dangerous. Not worth saving. Calder had come only to repair an old relay and leave before the storm worsened. That was the plan. He grabbed his coat, thicker than standard issue, and stepped into the rain. Pain sparked instantly where drops touched his gloves. The fabric smoked lightly. He swore under his breath and ran. The scrapyard stretched wide, filled with broken machines and forgotten ships. Acid rain ate at everything, turning sharp edges soft. Calder moved fast, slipping once, then catching himself on a leaning beam. The sound grew clearer with every step. He saw the pod first. Then he saw her. The hatchling was curled tight, shaking. Her pale scales were marked with dark spots where the rain had touched too long. One wing was trapped beneath a fallen plate. She was too small to pull free. Calder froze. It was not human. Not even close. His mind screamed at him to turn back. Unknown species. Acid rain. No protection. Every rule he had learned said this was a bad idea. The hatchling lifted her head. Her eyes met his. Fear flooded her face. She tried to crawl away, but the trapped wing held her. She cried out, louder now, desperate. Calder moved. He tore his coat open and threw it overhead just as another wave of rain hit. The fabric smoked and burned, but it slowed the damage. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the sting on his skin. Easy, he said, though he knew she could not understand. I've got you. She snapped weakly at the air, more fear than strength. Calder did not pull away. He braced himself and lifted the metal plate off her wing. The metal crumbled in his hands. The rain grew heavier. Calder wrapped the hatchling tight against his chest, shielding her with his body. Acid struck his back, burning through layers of cloth. Pain spread, sharp and hot, but he did not stop. He ran. Every step felt longer than the last. The hangar doors loomed ahead, half melted but still standing. Calder slammed his shoulder into the manual lever. The door groaned open just enough for him to slip inside. The rain stayed outside. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The hatchling lay still for a long moment. Then she moved. Slowly, she uncurled. Her silver eyes looked up at him. She touched his glove with one claw, gentle, unsure. Calder laughed softly, half from pain, half from relief. You're safe, he said. For now. Outside, high above the clouds, unseen eyes watched. Alien sensors recorded everything. A human entering acid rain. A human shielding a discarded hatchling. No weapons drawn. No commands given. Only action. Confusion rippled through distant observers. This was not how humans were described. Inside the hangar, Calder pulled a small light from his belt and checked the hatchling. The burns were shallow. Painful, but not fatal. She was tougher than she looked. She watched him closely now. Not trusting. Not attacking. Just watching. The storm howled outside, burning the sky as it always had. But inside the hangar, for the first time in a long while, something fragile had survived the rain. And somewhere in the galaxy, the idea of humanity began to change. Calder sat on the cold metal floor, still holding the hatchling close. Her body was tiny, trembling, but she had stopped crying. She looked up at him with wide silver eyes, unblinking and cautious. He could feel her heart beating fast, like a frightened drum, and he spoke softly, more to himself than to her. "You're stronger than you look," he said. "But you shouldn't be out there alone." The hatchling made a small, hesitant noise. Calder had no idea if it meant agreement, or fear, or just confusion. He studied her. Her scales were pale and almost glowing under the weak light of the hangar. Her wings were folded awkwardly, not yet ready to fly. She was helpless, yes, but alive, and that mattered. Outside, the acid rain continued to fall. Each drop sizzled when it hit metal, and the smell of burning ozone filled the air. Calder's jacket was scorched in places, and the edges of his gloves were blackened. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. The storms were deadly. Unknown species sometimes attacked humans. And still, he didn't move. He checked the hatchling's wing carefully, feeling the brittle edges and tiny bruises. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere this rain can't touch you." Her small claws brushed against his sleeve. She flinched at his touch at first, then stayed. Calder understood. She had never been touched like this, never been protected like this. She was used to being left behind. A soft alarm beeped from his wrist scanner. Alien drones were nearby, monitoring the area. Calder ignored it. He had no weapons, only tools, and no plan except to keep this hatchling alive. That was enough. He moved carefully through the hangar, setting the hatchling on a pile of spare crates. She curled into herself again, wary but curious. Calder pulled out scraps of metal and sheets of old insulation from a nearby shelf. He worked fast, hammering and bending pieces to form a makeshift shelter, small enough to shield the hatchling from the acid rain that might seep inside. The hatchling watched every motion, tilting her head like she was learning how this strange human thought. Calder could see her studying him, and he wondered if she understood his intent. Maybe not, but trust was building anyway. It was slow, cautious, fragile, but real. Hours passed. The rain outside hammered the hangar roof. Every so often, a spark from the corroded metal jumped like fireflies across the floor. Calder ignored the pain in his hands from cuts and burns. He had grown up fixing things on dangerous worlds. Risk was normal. But this risk was different. It wasn't about machines or credits. It was about life. The hatchling made a tiny noise, a whistle, almost like a sigh. Calder looked at her. She had moved closer, letting him brush some wet grime from her scales. For the first time, she didn't pull away. That small act of trust filled him with warmth he hadn't expected. "See? You're not alone anymore," he said. "Not while I'm here." Outside, the alien drones lingered, their sensors recording every movement. The species the hatchling came from was feared in this sector. Their records painted humans as weak, reckless, and cowardly. A human running into acid rain to protect one of their own should have been impossible. Yet their Calder was, ignoring danger, ignoring logic, just acting. The observers recorded this strange behavior in silence, confused. Calder worked through the night, repairing old lights and power nodes in the hangar. He made a small water container for the hatchling and heated a thin soup of synthetic nutrients. She watched him carefully, then slowly, almost hesitantly, tasted it. The movement was small, but Calder understood it. She was learning to trust. Hours later, he sat back, exhausted, and looked at her. She had curled into a ball inside the tiny shelter he had built. Her silver eyes reflected the soft light. He had no idea what her future held, or what her species would do when they found her. For now, though, she was safe. And that was enough. Calder thought of the rules he had always followed: avoid unnecessary danger, never interfere with alien life, stay alive. He had broken all of them. And yet, he did not regret it. Humans were judged by strength and skill, yes, but sometimes by compassion, by the courage to do what was right even when it was dangerous. He felt that truth now, more clearly than ever. He drifted into a light doze, keeping one eye on the hatchling. Outside, the acid rain continued to burn, relentless and unforgiving. But inside the hangar, surrounded by scraps and fire-scorched metal, a fragile bond formed. A human who should have walked away stayed. A hatchling who should have been left alone was not. And for a small moment, the harsh world outside mattered less than the quiet trust growing inside. When he woke, the hatchling had moved closer still, pressing her tiny body against him. Calder smiled faintly. She was learning. She was alive. And she would survive, because humans never left the helpless behind. The night passed. The storm raged. The world beyond the hangar was deadly, full of fire, acid, and fear. But inside, the hatchling and the human faced it together. And somewhere, far away, watchers recorded every moment, unsure how to interpret it. A human, risking everything, for an alien life. Not for glory. Not for reward. Simply because it was the right thing to do. Calder could not explain it. He did not need to. The hatchling had survived her first night in the storm. And in that survival, a quiet miracle had already begun. Calder held the hatchling close as he ran through the wrecked scrapyard. Each step splashed acid rain into puddles that hissed and bubbled. The hatchling shivered against his chest, her tiny claws clinging to his coat. She did not cry anymore, but her large silver eyes were wide, watching everything with careful attention. He knew the hangar was not enough. The storm was growing stronger, and the makeshift shelter would not hold if the rain kept pounding. He needed a better place, somewhere safe and dry. That's when he remembered the old service tunnels beneath the industrial zone. Long abandoned, overgrown with corroded pipes, but deep enough to stay dry from the acid storms. Calder set off, moving as quickly as he could without dropping her. Each step was painful, his gloves had burned through in some spots, and his boots hissed against puddles. Yet he did not slow down. He could feel her fragile body against him, and that alone was enough to keep him moving. The entrance to the tunnel was half collapsed, metal beams bent like broken ribs. Calder pushed and pried, using all his strength. Finally, it gave way just enough for them to slip inside. The air was still, heavy with dust and rust, but it was dry. The hatchling's wings fluttered weakly as she adjusted, and she curled into a small ball against him. Calder laid her down gently on a patch of smooth floor. He stood, brushing himself off. The tunnel was dark, almost pitch black, but it had potential. Broken lights hung from the ceiling, wires dangling like snakes. Pipes ran along the walls, some leaking corrosive water. He examined the system and realized he could repair enough of it to stop the runoff from reaching their shelter area. For hours, he worked. Sparks flew as he reconnected broken circuits. Old pumps groaned back to life, and slowly, the steady drip of corrosive water diminished. The hatchling stayed close, watching every motion. She was silent, her eyes following him as he crawled, twisted, and lifted pieces of metal to block dangerous leaks. Calder did not speak much, only muttering instructions to himself, but in his hands, the hatchling saw care and patience. He learned small things about her too. She made soft noises when water hit the floor, almost like she was testing it. She curled closer to him when sparks jumped too near. He realized she belonged to a species that humans rarely saw, creatures feared across nearby star systems for their power and intelligence. Many humans would have turned away, afraid of provoking them. But Calder had no fear. Not for himself. Not for her. Outside, distant sensors picked up unusual energy readings. Alien factions began to notice that a human was moving through the scrapyard, interfering with systems that had long been abandoned. They expected him to flee once the storm worsened, or at least to leave the hatchling behind. After all, humans were small, weak, and usually cautious around stronger species. But Calder did not stop. He worked faster now, tying pipes together, patching leaks, creating barriers with metal sheets. The hatchling climbed onto a raised platform and watched him, tilting her head as if she were learning from his actions. She did not speak. She could not. But trust was building. Step by step, small action by small action, she began to understand that this human would not abandon her. When a particularly loud hiss of acid rain echoed down the tunnel, she flinched. Calder reached out quickly, placing a gloved hand over hers. The warmth of his touch calmed her, and she stayed still. He smiled faintly. "See? It's okay. Nothing will get you here." Night fell outside, though in the tunnel, time seemed suspended. Calder worked tirelessly, moving with a rhythm of determination. Sparks flew from metal as he cut and repaired, but he never faltered. The hatchling eventually crawled closer, testing the floor with her claws. She sniffed the air, touched the wires carefully, then looked up at him. It was almost as if she were acknowledging his effort. Hours passed. The tunnel slowly transformed from a dangerous, abandoned place into a small sanctuary. Pipes were blocked or rerouted, puddles drained, lights flickered weakly but steadily. Calder cleaned his tools and set them aside. He looked at the hatchling, who had settled on a metal platform above the dry floor. Her breathing was calmer now, more confident. Somewhere far away, alien sensors recorded every action. They could not understand why a human would risk everything for a hatchling. Why he would build, repair, and protect without question. They expected fear or retreat. Instead, they saw patience, care, and resilience. The human did not leave, did not complain, did not demand reward. He only acted. And with every action, the watchers were forced to reconsider what they knew about humans. Calder knelt beside the hatchling, offering a small portion of synthetic nutrients. She sniffed it, hesitated, and finally took a tiny bite. The moment was quiet, almost ordinary, but it held enormous weight. Trust was forming. She would survive not just because she was strong or because the tunnel was safe, but because someone had chosen to care for her. The storm outside raged on. Acid rain beat against the metal entrance, sizzling as it touched pipes and walls. Calder ignored it. He sat with the hatchling, speaking softly to her even if she did not understand words. It did not matter. Care, patience, and action were enough. She curled against him, the smallest hint of comfort in a world that had left her behind. As the hours passed, Calder realized something. He had not planned this. No one asked him to save her. No one would recognize him for it. Yet here he was, working with everything he had, building a shelter from scrap and hope. And somewhere, deep in the galaxy, watchers continued to record his actions, forced to witness the quiet power of human courage and compassion. When morning light barely touched the tunnel entrance, Calder stood and stretched. The hatchling blinked up at him, still small, still fragile, but calmer than before. For the first time, she did not flinch at his movement. For the first time, she had a choice, to trust or flee. She stayed. And in that silent decision, in the shelter built from metal and care, something remarkable had begun. The hatchling had hope. The human had purpose. And the galaxy, far beyond the acid rain and broken scrapyard, had begun to see humans in a way they had never seen before. Calder had not expected anyone to notice. He thought the tunnels were far enough underground to remain hidden. But sensors across the sector began to flash warnings. Alien factions, curious and suspicious, picked up the unusual readings from the scrapyard and the tunnel. A human was active where no human should be, and he was not alone. The hatchling had grown calmer in the shelter. Her wings were stronger, and she moved with more confidence, but she never left Calder's side. She watched him work, watched him adjust the pumps and reroute the leaking pipes, and slowly, she began to trust him completely. Above ground, scouts reported the human's actions. They expected him to flee at the first sign of danger, or to abandon the hatchling once the storm worsened. That was what any human would do, they thought. Humans were clever, yes, but weak. Fragile. And they did not interfere with creatures far stronger than themselves. But Calder did not follow expectations. He continued working, despite the constant hiss of acid rain leaking through broken sections of the tunnel. He patched broken conduits, reinforced rusted supports, and even crafted small shelters inside the tunnel so the hatchling could rest without being exposed. Every action was deliberate, careful, and calm. The watchers in orbit recorded everything. They analyzed the human's every move. They could not understand why he risked his life for a fragile hatchling. They could not understand why he repaired old systems with such precision instead of fleeing to safety. One analyst said quietly, "He is not like the others. Humans do not act this way." Calder, meanwhile, barely noticed. He worked in silence, speaking softly to the hatchling as he tightened bolts and rerouted acid runoff. She listened to him, occasionally making small noises, almost like she was trying to communicate. He smiled faintly at her attempts. "You don't need to speak," he said. "I understand." The storm outside worsened. Sheets of acid rain fell in torrents, striking metal surfaces with deadly force. The tunnels groaned under the pressure. Yet Calder moved with steady hands, using every bit of skill he had to protect their small safe area. Sparks flew when metal twisted, and drops of acid sizzled as they hit the floor. The hatchling flinched only once, curling against him until the noise passed. Reports from alien observers began to question assumptions. "Why does he stay?" one whispered. "Why does he not abandon the hatchling?" Another said, "Perhaps humans are not weak. Perhaps they are something else." Calder did not hear them. He did not know their senses existed. All he knew was the hatchling and the tunnel and the storm. Every movement was careful, precise, and deliberate. He cleaned rusted surfaces, patched broken pipes, and created channels for runoff to avoid pooling in their shelter. The hatchling watched him work, her trust growing with each action. He realized something important: trust could be built without words. Simple actions, holding her when she trembled, repairing the shelter so she would not be wet, creating small spaces where she could rest safely, were enough. She learned he would not leave, and that knowledge made her braver. She stretched her wings slightly and crawled around the shelter, exploring in tiny steps, always returning to his side. Meanwhile, the alien observers continued to debate. They expected the human to falter, to panic, to flee. Every time they thought they saw weakness, he proved them wrong. The human's calm persistence, his courage, his care, it was unfamiliar. Dangerous, in its own way. Not because of strength, but because it defied expectation. Calder finally sat back on a dry platform, wiping grime from his hands. The hatchling had settled next to him, her head resting lightly on his knee. For the first time, he allowed himself to look at the tunnel as more than a shelter. It was a safe place, built from scraps and care. He had not planned to stay so long, but he could not leave. Not her. The storm began to fade, but the watchers remained vigilant. They recorded the human's every motion, analyzing patterns and behavior. It was unprecedented. One human, working tirelessly to protect a young hatchling of a feared species, without expectation, without reward, without hesitation. Calder did not know that he was changing minds across light years. He did not know that observers began whispering, questioning the weaknesses they had assumed about humans. For him, it was simple: keep the hatchling safe. Protect her from the storm. Care for her. By the time daylight finally filtered into the tunnel, the hatchling's wings were stronger, and she moved with more confidence. She hopped lightly across platforms, then paused and looked at Calder. He nodded gently, and she curled back next to him. She did not run. She did not hide. She trusted him completely. Outside, the alien factions continued to monitor. Reports were sent back to home systems. Analysts debated what they had seen. One conclusion grew louder with each observation: humans did not always act out of fear. Humans were unpredictable. Humans could be patient, careful, and brave in ways no one expected. Calder did not need recognition. He did not work for praise or approval. The hatchling was alive, and she was safe. That was all that mattered. Yet unknowingly, his actions were sending ripples across the galaxy, challenging ideas about humanity itself. As the tunnel grew quiet and the storm faded into distant echoes, Calder looked at the hatchling and smiled. "We made it through the night," he said. She blinked slowly, almost as if she understood. For now, they were safe. Together, they had survived the worst the storm could throw at them. And somewhere far above, sensors continued to record, observers continued to analyze, and the galaxy began to notice that one small human, acting with courage and care, could change more than a single life. He could change how an entire species, and perhaps the universe, saw humanity. The storm had finally passed. Outside, the acid rain had stopped, leaving the scrapyard shining wet and scorched under a pale sun. Calder stepped carefully through the shallow puddles, holding the hatchling gently in his arms. She had grown calmer, stronger, and more curious over the last few days. Her silver eyes now glimmered with life instead of fear. He carried her to the entrance of the tunnels, where the light touched the edges of metal and rust. The hatchling peered out, her small wings twitching as she took in the world beyond the shelter. She had never seen the sun, never felt warmth without the sting of acid rain. She chirped softly, almost as if she were asking him what came next. Calder smiled faintly. "We go home," he said, though he knew the answer was not simple. She did not have a home, not really. Her species was scattered across the stars, feared and respected. She had been abandoned for her color, for her weakness. Yet now, she was alive because he had chosen to act when no one else would. For weeks, he worked quietly. The hatchling stayed close, learning from him without words. He repaired old machines, built shelters, and scavenged supplies from abandoned ships. Each small act strengthened the bond between them. She began to mimic his movements, climbing on platforms, nudging objects, and testing the repaired systems. Her trust in him grew, and he treated that trust like a treasure. Alien factions continued to watch. They had expected humans to leave or fail. They had expected fear. Instead, they saw patience, resilience, and care. The human had done more than survive. He had protected a life that should have been impossible to save. And the watchers could not ignore it. One day, the hatchling stirred more than usual. She looked at Calder, then at the sky. Something had shifted. Her instincts, shaped by her species' powerful nature, whispered that it was time to return. Yet she did not move alone. She stayed with him. Calder understood. Trust was stronger than instinct, and she had chosen him. He prepared a small transport module. It was old and patched together, but it could carry them safely across the surface to a larger ship waiting in orbit. The hatchling climbed inside carefully, her wings folded but steady. She touched his arm lightly before settling. Calder felt the warmth of her tiny gesture and smiled. The alien species she belonged to arrived shortly after. Ships descended quietly, scanning for her. Calder expected confrontation, perhaps even anger. Instead, they paused, watching him. The hatchling chirped, and then, for the first time, the alien saw something new. She stayed by the human, willingly, safely. Their eyes widened at the scene. A leader among them floated closer, scanning Calder carefully. He could feel their judgment, their expectation that he would fail or betray. Yet he did nothing but stand firm, steady, calm. The hatchling looked up at him and chirped again. He nodded. "I didn't leave you before. I won't now," he said simply. The aliens whispered among themselves. No one had ever seen a human act with such deliberate care for another species. No one had ever seen patience like this, or courage that was not loud and violent but quiet and persistent. The hatchling, once abandoned, now stood between two worlds, one of fear and power, and one of humanity and quiet strength. Calder helped her onto the alien vessel. They did not resist, they only observed. The hatchling stretched her wings slowly, then turned to him. She brushed against his shoulder once, lightly, then followed her people. Calder watched until they disappeared into the ship's interior. Alone, he stood on the scorched metal of the scrapyard. The storm had left its marks, scorched earth, melted metal, and puddles that hissed softly as the last drops evaporated. Yet he felt no emptiness. The hatchling was alive, safe, and she had learned trust. Humanity had quietly made a mark, not with weapons or dominance, but with courage and care. Back in orbit, sensors recorded the events. Analysts argued over what they had seen. A single human had risked everything for one fragile hatchling. He had acted without expectation of reward. He had shown patience when others would panic. He had shown care when others would abandon. And the galaxy noticed. Calder returned to his small base. The hatchling's absence left a quiet space, but it was filled with pride and memory. He repaired equipment, checked old systems, and continued the work he had always done. Life went on, routine yet meaningful. In distant sectors, the story spread quietly. Aliens who had watched, and others who had heard the sensors, began to speak differently of humans. They told stories of a species that did not need claws, scales, or fire to command respect. A species that could protect the weak, act without fear, and change hearts without violence. Calder did not know he had changed opinions across star systems. He did not seek recognition. He had acted because it was the right thing, because a life depended on him. That was all that mattered. And yet, in his quiet acts, humanity had made its mark on the galaxy. Months later, he received a small message from the alien species. It was simple, a gesture of thanks. No praise, no grand statements, just acknowledgement. The hatchling was safe, thriving, and growing stronger. Humans and aliens had formed an unspoken bond. Calder smiled faintly. That was enough. The scrapyard, once scorched and abandoned, slowly returned to silence. Machines waited to be repaired, tunnels waited to be explored, storms waited to come again. And somewhere far above, the galaxy remembered one human who had done what no one expected. One human had quietly saved a life. One human had shown what it meant to care. And that became humanity's quiet legacy. Not through power, not through conquest, not through fear, but through patience, courage, and a simple choice to help when it mattered most. A single human had changed a hatchling's life, changed the opinion of a species, and reminded the universe that small acts of care could echo across the stars. Calder looked at the horizon, the sun breaking through scattered clouds. Somewhere, far away, the hatchling stretched her wings under the warmth. And he knew, without words, that what he had done mattered. Humanity had left a mark, not with weapons, but with the heart.